step out of the vehicle. Now.
Sir, he's not breathing. I had no choice.
You broke the law. You put everyone at risk.
I saved a life. That's what matters.
You could have killed someone else.
Maybe. Or maybe. He'd already be dead if I waited.
Traffic was frozen. The right lane was sealed shut, construction barriers, stalled vehicles, nowhere to move. Inside the ambulance, a young man fought for air. The oxygen mask fogged with every shallow breath. The heart monitor stuttered, uneven and panicked. The driver made a choice he was never trained for. He turned the wheel and drove against traffic. He knew it was illegal. He also knew stopping would turn an ambulance into a coffin dot. Stay with this story not for outrage, but for understanding. This isn't about breaking a traffic rule. It's about what happens when law, discretion, and human survival collide in a matter of minutes. The city had stalled under flashing hazard lights and orange barricades. The right lane, the only legal route for an emergency vehicle, was blocked completely. Cars piled bumper to bumper, cones forming a barricade that glimmered in the rain. Horns blared in frustrated symphony. Tires spun in place, and streetlights reflected off puddles like shattered mirrors. Inside the ambulance, the young patient's chest rose and fell in short, jagged gasps, each breath more desperate than the last. His fingers twitched, searching for something solid to hold on to, and his eyes fluttered, open, weak but aware, as if he could sense the life slipping from him in real time. The heart monitor's blip stuttered erratically, a staccato warning that echoed like a ticking clock, counting down toward a final second no one wanted to reach. Paramedics hovered over him, their movements precise but tense. Each adjustment of the oxygen mask, each flick of a wrist checking vitals seemed measured against invisible time, a countdown no protocol could quantify. Saturation dropping. One murmured, voice low but urgent. "We've got less than a minute." Before he didn't finish, the sentence hung in the humid air like an unspoken curse. The driver gripped the wheel with white-knuckled intensity, knuckles pressing into the leather, eyes flicking between the congested lane ahead and the rearview mirror where life itself clung to every second. He knew the law. Wrong-way driving was a serious offense, even for emergency vehicles, and discretion existed only on paper, in manuals and memorized codes. But those rules had never accounted for this. The suffocating pause of a city caught in standstill traffic, the frantic pulse of a dying boy, the quiet desperation of those who know every second matters. He weighed his options: wait for clearance, call for backup, attempt to maneuver. Through the jammed streets, all would cost precious moments the boy did not have. And so he made a decision he had never been trained to make. The tires squealed lightly as he turned into the blocked lane, cutting against traffic with every ounce of precision he could muster. Headlights from oncoming vehicles caught his reflection in the rain-soaked pavement. Drivers swerved instinctively, honking in alarm, but he pressed forward. Every heartbeat in the back of the ambulance was a drum of urgency. Every pulse in his own chest, a reminder that discretion had a human cost. A police cruiser appeared ahead, lights pulsing red and blue, siren wailing. The wrong-way decision had not gone unnoticed. "Pull over immediately." The officer barked through the loudspeaker, voice sharp and uncompromising. "I can't stop." The driver yelled back, voice strained, almost breaking. "He's not breathing. He won't make it if we wait." The officer hesitated for the briefest of moments, training and instinct warring in his expression. Manuals did not cover this, the delicate collision of law and life, the unbearable question of when rules must bend to save a life. Time slowed, though in reality it continued, each second a measure of fragile survival. Inside, the monitor's alarm rose again, a frantic wail that drowned out even the siren. Paramedics moved in synchronized urgency, checking 4S, adjusting oxygen, whispering numbers that meant everything and nothing simultaneously. Every protocol in their training existed to safeguard life. But here, following it to the letter would mean abandoning it. The driver's decision, though technically unlawful, was now the only shield between the boy and death. Rain streaked across the windshield, blurring the lights of the city into lines of color that streaked past, like molten glass. The ambulance moved in a careful dance, wrong lane, wrong direction, morally correct. Every car that swerved to avoid them became a reminder of how fragile this calculus was, how one misjudgment could turn heroism into disaster. Minutes stretched like hours. The boy's eyes fluttered closed, then opened again, searching, trusting, relying entirely on the choices made in these impossible moments. The driver felt every second press into his chest like weight, every rule-book rule collide with human instinct. Every flashing red light a judgment waiting to land. He realized, with bitter clarity, that no amount of training could prepare a person for the collision of law and life in the same breath. And yet, He drove on. The city's chaos framed his urgency: wet streets, honking horns, flashing lights, the faint smell of gasoline mixing with antiseptic. He had entered a gray zone where policy offered no shelter, where every inch gained was salvation or catastrophe, where courage and recklessness were inseparable. The wrong way was no longer a question of legality. It was a question of morality, of necessity, of what one does when seconds are lives and lives are slipping. As the ambulance cut through the rain-darkened streets, the officer made a choice of his own: to follow, to intervene, to enforce the law as it had always been enforced. Two systems collided, one defined by rules, the other defined by human fragility. And in that collision, neither authority nor protocol could claim absolute victory. Only the pulse of a boy's life, fragile and uncertain, kept beating in the storm of consequences. For the driver, there was a single truth: no one trains you for this. No handbook, no drill, no certification can ever prepare someone to choose between the safety of rules and the immediacy of survival. And as the ambulance pressed on, carrying a life balanced on a razor's edge, he understood the unspoken weight of every decision made in uniform, the cost that would linger long after the siren faded. The police cruiser emerged like a predator from the corner of the intersection, lights slicing through the night, casting red and blue flashes across rain-slick asphalt. The patrol car moved with precision, cutting into the lane as if the city itself had carved a path for it. Its siren pierced the air, urgent and insistent, a mechanical heartbeat that demanded obedience. The stop was immediate, procedural, cold. Shut the engine down, the officer's voice commanded, amplified by the loudspeaker, sharp enough to cut through the wail of the ambulance siren. Every word carried authority, practiced, rehearsed, unquestionable. The driver's hands trembled, barely contained. He blinked rapidly, eyes flicking between the barricades ahead, the patrol car, and the back of the ambulance where a young life hung in fragile balance. I can't, he said, voice taut with urgency but controlled. He's not breathing. Please, I need to move. The officer's posture stiffened. He stepped closer to the vehicle, flashlight cutting across the driver's face, eyes narrowed behind mirrored lenses. In training, officers are taught to prioritize control, to enforce the law without hesitation. But manuals never included scenarios where every second of compliance could mean a human life fading inside a vehicle just a few feet away. Behind the driver, paramedics leaned over the stretcher, murmuring updates. Heart rate dropping, one whispered. Another checked the 4-line, fingers precise but hurried. Each motion was synchronized, efficient, calculated but under pressure. Efficiency collided with desperation. The patient's chest rose and fell in uneven spurts, shallow and frantic, and every beep from the monitor reverberated like a countdown the officer couldn't hear but that the driver felt deep in his chest. Sir, I said, shut it down. The officer barked again, moving to the rear of the ambulance. His flashlight reflected off wet pavement, red and blue streaks painting the walls of nearby buildings. Protocol demanded compliance. Discretion had boundaries, and yet, this was not a routine traffic stop. This was a race against mortality. And the law did not account for urgency measured in moments of life and death. The driver took a shallow breath, fingers tightening around the steering wheel. I'm not breaking the law out of choice. I'm breaking it to save a life, he said, voice steadier than he felt. He gestured toward the rear. There's a child back there, his oxygen, it's dropping. Every second matters, please trust me. A tense silence followed. The officer's lips pressed into a thin line. Authority demanded clarity, not explanation. Logic and urgency collided in the space between them. He could follow the letter of the law, ensure compliance, document violations, but at what cost? Each tick of the clock in the back of the ambulance carried a weight that no report could ever quantify. The city around them seemed to hold its breath. Rain-slicked streets reflected the flashing lights, turning the asphalt into a river of color, bending and stretching with every flicker. Other vehicles waited, confused and frustrated, horns muted by the chaos of emergency. Pedestrians paused, umbrellas up, instinctively aware that something larger than themselves was unfolding. Inside, the driver's mind raced. Every maneuver calculated. Every inch forward could be the difference between life and death. He felt the weight of training and conscience pressing against each other. Years of driving protocol, emergency response drills, policy manual, all of it boiled down to one equation: move or delay, act or obey. The officer finally spoke, quieter now, measured. If he dies back there, his words hung in the air, unfinished, a mortal weight heavier than any code. If he dies, the report will reflect who had control. I know, the driver said, voice barely above a whisper, sweat mingling with rain on his forehead. But if we stop now, he dies anyway. I'm asking you to let me do what no one is trained to do. Please. The tension stretched taut, a wire ready to snap. The sirens screamed behind them, drowned in the storm of flashing lights and the silent, panicked counting in the driver's mind. And then, a decision, an unspoken negotiation between law and urgency. The officer stepped aside just enough, signaling a cautious allowance, a fragile bridge between protocol and instinct. The ambulance surged forward, moving in the wrong lane, against the flow of traffic, a single heartbeat racing down the dark street. Red and blue lights chased them, reflecting off puddles, neon signs, and wet asphalt, a visual drumbeat of urgency. The boy's monitor beeped faster, a staccato warning that mirrored the pulse of everyone inside the vehicle. Every second carried consequence, every choice measured in life or death. Training had prepared the officer to enforce. Training had prepared the driver to respond. But life had prepared neither for the collision of law and morality, for the weight of decisions when minutes are measured not in authority, but in human fragility. The wrong lane stretched ahead, a narrow, treacherous path, lined with vehicles and obstacles, but necessary. The city, drenched and waiting, seemed to blur around them. For the driver, the stakes were immediate and existential. For the officer, they were procedural yet moral. Both men understood that this moment would echo long after the sirens faded, long after the report was filed, long after the city returned to order. And inside the ambulance, a life waited on the fragile promise that instinct, judgment, and courage could coexist with law. The driver gripped the wheel tighter, eyes fixed on the path ahead. The clock ticked. The pulse monitor beeped. And in that precise collision of urgency and authority, the human cost of protocol revealed itself in the clearest, most unforgiving way possible. The ambulance's rear doors sealed behind him like a world unto itself, separating life and law from the chaos of the street. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed above, casting a harsh, clinical glow over the narrow space. Monitors beeped in uneven rhythms, each sound a fragile heartbeat clinging to a thread. Tubes and wires snaked across the stretcher, a tangle of technology, desperation keeping a body tethered to the possibility of survival. The boy's chest rose shallowly, shallow enough that every inhale seemed borrowed, every exhale a negotiation with mortality. The paramedics worked in measured synchrony, hands precise, movements honed through years of drills and repeated scenarios, but drills never truly prepare you for the weight of a life slipping so visibly through your fingers. One hand adjusted an oxygen mask, fogging with every exhalation. Another tapped gently on the monitor, coaxing a reading that stubbornly refused to stabilize. Pulse dropping fast, a medic whispered, voice taut but controlled, "Keep him oxygenated, keep him alive." The words were more a prayer than instruction. For the driver, the world had narrowed to the rearview mirror and the rhythm of the patient's lungs. Every street, every curve, every approaching vehicle demanded concentration, but the real terror was back there inside the box of glass and metal where a human life hung by the thinnest of threads. Time dilated unnaturally. Seconds felt like minutes, minutes like hours, and yet the heart monitor insisted the clock moved only in cruel increments. The boy was no longer just a patient. He was the son of a judge, someone who'd grown up understanding that law was order, that authority was structure, that justice was something predictable. And now, in the back of this ambulance, law could do nothing to save him. Procedures could not breathe for him. Manuals could not replace oxygen, and authority could not rewind the seconds that passed with each shallow, ragged breath. The irony was bitter. The system built to uphold life and fairness now existed only outside the doors, irrelevant to the life fighting for every pulse inside. The paramedics worked quietly, words clipped, efficient, each instruction precise. Bag him oxygen to 10 liters. One squeezed the manual bag valve, the device inflating and deflating with each desperate breath. Check 4 flows weak. Push epi if we have to. Every action, every tool, every beep was a negotiation with fate. Emergency medicine tolerated no mistakes, yet here, every delay was magnified by traffic bomb. A stop that should never have been, by seconds counted in heartbeats rather than minutes. The driver spoke through the partition, voice calm but strained. "He's deteriorating. We're almost there. Just hold on, hold on." The boy's eyes flickered open briefly, searching, trusting, instinctively reaching toward the back wall as though he knew someone was fighting for him. The scene was painfully human, unfiltered, and unsparing. There was no time to dramatize, no space for reflection, only the immediacy of survival. Outside, the city remained a blur of red and blue sirens and rain-slick streets. Inside, the ambulance became a different world, a place governed by oxygen saturation. 4 lines, manual breaths, and the fragile boundary between life and death. Every blink of the monitor, every shallow rise of the chest, demanded complete attention. No one could afford distraction. Every second that passed unmonitored, every moment delayed, was a threat. Minutes in this world did not pass. They expanded and contracted, tangible and fatal. The paramedic's hands moved with mechanical precision, yet guided by instinct. One adjusted a line. Another reassured the boy, quietly, murmuring words he could barely hear, humanizing the sterile, high-stakes environment. "You've got this," the medic said softly. "We're with you. Just breathe." The words were a fragile tether, a thread of humanity in a machine-driven battle against mortality. The driver's focus never wavered. Each turn through the wrong lane, each swerve to avoid cars, was measured in milliseconds. Every second gained was a life prolonged. Every misstep a potential tragedy. He knew that law enforcement could intervene, that he had technically broken protocol, but the boy's life existed in a different jurisdiction now, one defined not by legality but by survival. In those moments, the ambulance became a crucible. Machines, medical knowledge, and human will collided. Every beep of the monitor, every hiss of oxygen, every blink of fluorescent light magnified the fragility of existence. The boy's life depended on the precision of those inside and the calculated defiance of those outside of the back doors. It was a delicate, unforgiving balance, a reminder that emergency medicine was not a job but a negotiation with mortality, where every rule mattered less than the human lives it aimed to protect. And as the city lights stretched into streaks outside the windows, as the sirens echoed and the officer's pursuit remained a distant but pressing presence, every heartbeat in the back of the ambulance was both defiance and hope. Minutes were infinite and fragile, and everything hung upon the driver, the medics, and the unspoken knowledge that no training manual could ever truly prepare someone for the weight of another person's life. The boy was gone. His shallow breaths had ended hours ago, leaving only the mechanical echoes of monitors and the faint hum of the city outside. The ambulance had delivered him too late, and the weight of loss followed the family from the streets into the marble halls of justice. Now the story shifted from the wet asphalt, flashing lights, and wrong way decisions to the cold fluorescent glare of a courtroom where grief was measured in testimony and legality, not heartbeats. The judge, a figure accustomed to authority and procedure, walked through the courtroom doors like a man carrying both law and grief. He had spent a lifetime interpreting statutes, adjudicating disputes, and enforcing order. But today, the law could not protect his son. Today, every rule he had ever applied seemed hollow, insufficient, incapable of capturing the raw, human cost of seconds lost. His robe hung empty behind him. Here, there was no ceremonial authority, only a father confronting the machinery of justice that had failed him personally. Bodycam footage flickered onto screens, capturing each microsecond of the confrontation on the road. The officer's calm, measured commands replayed again and again, precise and unyielding. Traffic statutes were cited, the codes of emergency vehicle operation displayed in stark text. Every policy was followed with technical accuracy. On paper, the officer's actions appeared defensible, correct. But on the tape, the human heartbeat, the boy's life existed as a fragile, irreplaceable measure of what the law could not quantify. Witnesses were called, paramedics, officers, traffic analysts. Each presented facts and timings, dissecting decisions into brackets of legality. Every testimony reinforced the procedural correctness of certain choices, the necessity of adherence to training, the importance of authority. Yet the emotional truth, the grief, the suddenness of death, the human cost was impossible to quantify. No deposition, no signed affidavit, no forensic timestamp could bring back the moment. Lost in traffic, the seconds stretched into eternity by barricades and bureaucracy. The judge listened quietly, taking in every statement, every technical point, every attempt to reconcile law and loss. He felt the weight of every syllable, each one a reminder that the system he had devoted his life to interpreting had failed his family in the most intimate, unrepeatable way. There was anger, yes, but also a crushing realization that laws, statutes, and procedures, even though designed to save life, often lack the elasticity to accommodate human suffering in real time. Counsel argued vigorously. One side cited emergency vehicle exemptions, the right to bypass traffic in life or death situations. Another emphasized the officer's duty to maintain order, to prevent chaos, to enforce rules impartially. Technicalities were dissected, scrutinized, and debated with meticulous care. And yet, between each legal argument, the boy's absence hung in the room like an unspoken witness. His life, his death, the timing of his final breaths, none of it could be reconciled neatly with policy. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered, cameras flashing, capturing the optics of accountability. Headlines would focus on procedure, protocol, and precedent. But inside, grief existed as a living, breathing force, manifesting in the judge's silent moments between questioning, in the subtle tremor of his hands, in the way he lingered on every detail of his son's final journey. The human cost was unquantifiable. Authority had a record, loss had a narrative all its own. The officer sat quietly, reviewing his own decisions, body taut but composed. Training had prepared him to respond, to enforce, to justify, but it had not prepared him for the personal, existential weight of being implicated in another's loss. His intent had been procedural, his actions aligned with policy. But in the court of human consequence, intent mattered little. Every heartbeat that was lost, every choice that collided with mortality, became part of an unrecorded ledger no statute could reconcile. The judge's voice, measured yet heavy with unspoken despair, finally broke the procedural rhythm. He questioned not only the decisions made, but the assumptions behind them, the blind adherence to authority, the rigidity of rules and moment that demand discretion. The cost of obedience when life is fleeting. The courtroom became a place where law and morality intersected uncomfortably, a mirror reflecting the tension between human compassion and institutional procedure. No ruling, no piece of evidence, no procedural victory could restore the boy's life. And yet, in the quiet aftermath of testimony, the judge and those involved understood something fundamental. The law exists to serve life, not the other way around. But life is unpredictable, stubborn, and unforgiving. It will test statutes, challenge authority, and demand decisions that manuals cannot teach. As the day drew to a close, the courtroom emptied slowly. Chairs scraped, papers rustled, footsteps echoed against marble floors. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflective. The city moved on, oblivious to the grief contained within these walls, but those inside carried it forward, the knowledge that law and life sometimes exist in tragic misalignment, that authority can enforce, but cannot prevent the consequences of human fragility. The boy was gone. The system endured. And in the echo of the courtroom, between statutes and bodycam footage, between argument and record, the undeniable truth remained: human loss is the measure by which law is tested, and no file, no code, no protocol can ever fully contain it. The courtroom had emptied, leaving behind only the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scent of polished wood. Outside, rain had left the streets slick and reflective, mirrors of a city that moved forward oblivious to the life-altering decisions played out hours earlier. The case officially settled, legal documents signed, statements filed, policies dusted over and revised. On paper, the system had worked. Emergency discretion clauses were updated, training protocols amended, a few officers received reminders, and the city proclaimed procedural improvement. But procedure, as always, was only part of the story. The officer had lost everything that could be measured in conventional terms. His badge remained pinned to his uniform, but the authority it symbolized had dissolved. Reputation, career, future prospects, all stripped away not by law but by the harsh moral ledger of consequence. He had acted in line with policy, had followed the letter of emergency procedures, yet his choices carried the weight of human loss, and no procedure could protect him from that. He walked through empty halls, footsteps echoing, each one a reminder that being technically correct is often insufficient when the world exacts its own judgment. The ambulance driver returned to the streets, but the vehicle now felt like a coffin rather than a lifeline. Every siren, every passing car, reminded him of the boy whose life he had tried to save. Every decision replayed in his mind, turning into the wrong lane, defying protocol. Racing against death haunted him with the persistent echo of what if. He could not undo what had happened. He could not rewind the seconds, nor reallocate the loss. And no amount of moral justification could silence the question lodged in the deepest corners of his conscience. Had saving one life meant condemning another? Department meetings were held, reports drafted, recommendations made. Policies were rewritten, officers trained to account for extraordinary discretion, and internal reviews praised the decision-making framework in theory. The system had adjusted, technically, administratively, but the human cost, the grief, the guilt, the irreversible absence remained untouched. Those elements could not be encoded into memos or workshops. They lingered unquantifiable, unreported, yet palpable in every action, glance, and silent moment. For the judge, the procedural settlement offered no solace. Legal vindication or acknowledgement could not restore the seconds that had vanished or the finality of a child's last breath. He understood, with a painful clarity, that the law exists to guide behavior, to codify fairness, to measure responsibility, but it cannot resurrect life, and it cannot capture the intimate, unrecorded suffering that follows. Authority, in its cold, ordered logic, had proved powerless in the face of time's irreversibility. The city moved forward. New clauses, new training, new guidelines promised a better response next time. Emergency discretion would be codified, exceptions noted, and officers reminded of the balance between rule and humanity. Yet the fundamental truth remained. Even when systems are correct, even when protocol align perfectly with law, if time is wrong, the cost is always paid by someone else. It is the invisible, inescapable tax, exacted by circumstance and human fragility, and no policy can ever fully reimburse it. The driver never found comfort. He continued to drive ambulances, save lives when he could, but each victory was tempered by memory. The wrong way decision, though made with the purest intent, lingered as a moral scar. He could not erase the feeling that every choice in those critical seconds had a weight, and that weight often fell on the shoulders of those least prepared to bear it. Humanity is rarely neat. Morality is rarely clean, and in this collision of law, life, and consequence, clarity is a luxury no one is afforded. The officer, the driver, the family, they all moved through the aftermath in different ways, each carrying an unrecorded ledger of grief, guilt, and reflection. The system had adapted. It had learned. Rules were stricter, exemptions clear, training more nuanced. But the intangible cost, the weight of lives lost, of irreversible moments, of decisions made in impossible circumstances remained. It was a quiet, persistent lesson that would follow them forever, that correctness, measured in compliance or procedure, is never enough to guarantee mortal peace. And in the silence that followed the headlines, the meetings, the policy revisions, the sirens that returned to their normal rhythm, a single truth lingered like a shadow: when the system is right, but time is wrong, the price is always paid by someone else. It is not justice, it is consequence. It is the echo of decisions made in the gray zone, the haunting reminder that humanity is never fully accounted for in any statute, report, or record. No one wins, no one is absolved, and the cost of being correct is measured in the quiet, unrecorded toll that only memory can tally.